On today's episode of the Lockdown NHL podcast, turns out we called it. Yaroslav Askorav headed to San Jose. And on the goalie front, what's going on with Thatcher Demco?
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On NHL. We are your daily NHL podcast, and we are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Lockdown NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's episode of Lockdown NHL, we break down the Yaroslav Askorav trade headed to the San Jose Sharks, how he fits into the Sharks organization, the return for Nashville. We'll dive into every bit of the trade that we essentially called last week here on this show. We'll also talk about another big domino that fell, Rutger McGroarty heading to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and concern in Vancouver as we're getting real close to training camp and the start of the preseason, and there still is no update on Thatcher Demco. We'll talk about how worried Canucks fans should be. All coming up here on today's show. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Lockdown Wild, joined, as always, here on Western Conference Tuesday by JD Young of Locked On Sharks. And JD, we talked last week and said something to the effect of, if Yaroslav Askarov is available, he'd be a good target for the San Jose Sharks. Turns out he was. Turns out they did. And so the kind of last piece of the prospect puzzle for the San Jose Sharks is now filled. And so just right off the bat, talk me through how you like your reaction to the news that this trade was going down, which I'm sure was full of plenty of joy. Let's just start there. What did you think when the Sharks actually made this happen to bring Askarov into the fold?
So when I first saw like the Elliot Friedman tweet, Askarov is heading to San Jose. There's I think with every trade, right, there's the joy of like, oh, we're getting this, followed by the sheer panic of what did we give up? And I thought this was going to be like I talked about last week on my show. I think we talked about it too, where I thought it was going to be more of an NHL trade, especially with how the Preds are very much in an all-in situation. And I was relieved to see that it was not an NHL roster player going back, especially not a young NHL roster player going back to Nashville and giving up a first-round pick, the Vegas first-round pick, and there is some slight protections on it where if it's a top 10 pick, the Sharks can basically choose between their own pick and Vegas's pick. I don't really see a world where the Sharks are better than Vegas this season. So it'll be the Vegas pick going back. And David Edstrom, who the Sharks acquired last trade deadline from Tomas Hertl, probably was going to top out as the 4C, right? With San Jose, you have Matt Salbrini, Will Smith, Philip Beastead, who was their 2021 or 2022, excuse me, 2023. I don't know. Too many drafts. He was basically Mike Greer's first pick, and there just really wasn't a lot of room for David Edstrom, kind of in the pipeline. So I think getting rid of a first round pick is always tough, but I mean, the Sharks have been drafting multiple first round picks, and there's still an easy world where they are drafting multiple first round picks this year after the trade deadline. But what's the old saying, right? I could either have a boat or I could have a box that could be anything, including a boat, and they got the boat right now. So I'm taking the boat. And Askarov solves the biggest question in the Sharks pipeline is, what are you going to do in net for the foreseeable future? And you just solved it. Yaroslav Askorav is going to be the Sharks' he's going to play NHL games this year, and next year he will probably be at least the 1A, with the assumption of them getting an established veteran behind him, and then eventually just kind of take that role and he perfectly marries with Michael Brady's timeline, Will Smith's timeline, like everybody's it all just kind of seems to work here. So interesting that Mike Grier even said they've been kind of working on this for the past year. So there's the tinfoil hat guy in me is like Mike Grier just be like, hey, just become a nuisance. So you want to get traded, and I got you, Brody. I got you. So that's the like tinfoil hat, especially with the AHL All-Star game in San Jose this year. The Mike Grier just like become a nuisance, become feral. We'll get you over here where you're going to have all the runway to be the starting goaltender and be the guy in San Jose.
There are a lot of interesting wrinkles to this because, as you said, the Sharks right now have Vitek Vanacek and Mackenzie Blackwood on the roster. And so you have Askarov, who goes from sitting behind UC Saros and Scott Wedgwood on the NHL roster to, like you said, getting the potential to play NHL games as soon as this year, but then being the unquestioned guy going forward after that because the team's already signed him, in tandem with this. They signed him to a 2-year deal. So he's obviously going to be the the guy going forward, but it is just interesting. Like, I think this speaks to how good UC Saros is that you're looking at a guy who can take of 82 games when he's healthy, when he's on, he can give you 60 starts.
Yeah.
And so Scott Wedgwood is a guy who doesn't need he doesn't need a bunch of starts in a row to really get himself going. Like he is a backup. He knows it. And he knows he's playing with a guy that can play all the time. And so you go to that situation, and on the Vanacek and the Blackwood side of things, those are two goalies. They're 28 and 27 years old, but you've seen it. I don't have to tell you. You've seen how the goalie situation has played out. And if the Sharks are out of it, like, one of those guys is probably going to be on the move
when the Sharks are out of it. And you can even put a pin in this conversation until later in this episode because, there's that's a potential right there. But the light bulb just clicked for you on that one, huh?
Yeah,
I mean, that you look at like Mackenzie Blackwood, who has struggled with injuries throughout his entire career. Even last year, missed a couple weeks here and there because of injuries. Vitek Vanacek, who's been mostly healthy, but last year was shut down because of injuries. There's a clear path for Askarov to play games, and I kind of put the over-under at like 15 NHL games this year, especially once the trade deadline hits, and they're going to want to kind of see what he's learned and how the AHL season goes. But I fully expect Askarov to kind of start with the Barracuda and then kind of be the guy as soon as the season goes south, / they trade somebody, / they just want to get a look at him and then kind of set themselves up for future, going into next year. So, but I mean, the Sharks, I think, I don't know who's had a better summer than Mike Grier. Like, it has been a great summer for Mike Grier and the Sharks. And yes, they're still going to be a bad team this year, but they have all the pieces there for this rebuild. Everything just kind of all coming together at the same time for San Jose. And you can see why they keep hammering that the future is teal, because it's coming, buddy.
Yeah,
and I am going to be obnoxious.
Well, you've earned. I think you've more than earned the right to be able to do that with what the Sharks have done over the last few seasons, at the very least. So I won't stand in your way of that once the Sharks climb to the top of the mountain. But it's interesting too, just to kind of wrap this up on the Barry Trotz side of things. Those reports that he was trying to take care of this, behind closed doors. Askarov kind of forced his hand by going public with the trade demands, and then you had Barry Trotz very publicly saying, like, we expect the player to report. And you always know the GM is ticked off when they say the player.
Like, they don't use the name. Yeah,
they don't acknowledge the player by name. They just say the player. Yeah. Expected the player to report for camp and
he's gone.
To win a job.
He already checked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So,
he probably had the trade taken care of by the time he put that out there, because it was not too long after that all of a sudden it's done. So it's a great move for the Sharks. I love it. Like,
yeah.
just as kind of you obviously are way more plugged into it than I am, but just as somebody kind of having a broad eye on the Western Conference, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to add to the mix, and the Sharks just get another good prospect that's going to be on the similar timetable. Because I've heard that quote during last year, and I forget. I'm going to have to go back and try to find it because it's just so good. It was on X, and the notion was, if you are in your window to contend,
Mhm.
everything needs to line up at that time. And if you have prospects or draft picks that aren't going to help you in that contention window, move them for something that can. And
Yep.
so, for the San Jose Sharks, they continue to get all these young players that are in the 21, 22, from 19 to about 22 is just a real solid range of where all these top Sharks prospects are at. So 3-4 years down the road, they're all going to be 23, 24, 25. And that's what we call the window.
Sounds good to me, buddy. I
Yeah.
cannot wait.
To the window, to the wall, to Rutger McGroarty getting traded to the Penguins. We'll discuss why this makes sense for Pittsburgh and why things didn't work out for the Winnipeg Jets, as well as we continue. It's trade day here on Western Conference Tuesday for Lockdown NHL. We'll continue after this. Today's episode of Lockdown NHL is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style. eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. We'll be getting fantasy drafts going here before too long, and if you want the intel on which players for your favorite teams you should target and the ones that you should stay away from, make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. They've been doing a great job going team by team and picking out the players that you should be trying to get. Like if you're a Minnesota Wild fan, obviously Kirill Kaprizov is on everybody's list.
It's pretty good.
But guys like, Matt Boldy, Joel Eriksson Ek are coveted fantasy players as well. And so for all the lowdown, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, available wherever you listen to your podcasts. So we go from Yaroslav Askorav getting traded to another player who wanted a change of scenery, to Rutger McGroarty. McGroarty, it was widely rumored, and I saw this essentially confirmed by Michael Russo. Had Zeev Buium not fallen to the Minnesota Wilds at 12, to where they traded up to get him, because they're like, how is he still here? Had that not played out that way, Rutger McGroarty would have been a Minnesota Wild forward. Because I think that was the route that they were going to go with that pick, had Zeev not dropped
Yeah, the
to
13th
them.
pick, right?
Yeah, they had the 13th pick, and so it likely would have been that McGroarty gets traded for that 13th pick, and then the Wild add him into their system as well. Funny how one instance can just change the trajectory of how things play out. But McGroarty goes to the Pittsburgh Penguins. He signs his entry-level contract. Brayden Yager coming back to the Winnipeg Jets. And so let's just look at this trade a little bit, JD. Obviously, it wasn't going to work for McGroarty in Winnipeg. Didn't like the fit, and the team wanted him, I think, to come up, but he wanted to go back to Michigan. And so there was some
other way. No, he wanted to come up. They wanted him to go back to Michigan, right? Because they didn't really have a spot for him to play. There wasn't really a clear path, kind of like with Askarov, right? There wasn't really a clear path for him to play NHL games right away. And, we're seeing this more and more with players trying to control their future, which I'm going to support. Like the players, you really get one shot at this, right? You got to make sure if you're not in the right spot and things go. We've seen plenty of careers go sideways because of plenty of different situations. So I'm not going to fault the player for this, but I think for McGroarty, right, he was wanting to go pro. I mean, I think he kind of done everything he could at Michigan, and you look at, especially with a lot of college players now, where it's kind of the 2 years, especially these top guys, 2 years at school, and then you kind of make that jump. Even, Cutter Gauthier, who is a top 5 pick 2 years before making the jump, but he also didn't like the situation with Philly, gets traded to the Anaheim Ducks, right? I think that's just kind of the pathway now, is these kind of top 15 picks is 2 years at school, and then you're expected to kind of make the jump and turn pro. And we see the way Winnipeg kind of handled the Cole Perfetti situation, right? Young player who's kind of playing like fourth line minutes here, not getting a chance to shine and really continue his development, and it's stuck in that no man's land of being too good for the AHL but not getting enough opportunity in the NHL. And I wonder if McGroarty saw that with Perfetti, which is like, yeah, dude, that's not for me.
Well, it's interesting because, on the Minnesota front, we've got a similar situation with Jack McBain. When he was drafted and was getting to the point where he was going to sign his ELC and come up, he looked at how the roster looked for the Minnesota Wild and was like, I don't really see a future here outside of like a third or a fourth line role. And so he made it public that he wanted to go elsewhere. The Wild trade him to Arizona. Ironic, though, that he kind of that's the exact spot that he's in with with the Utah hockey club. So,
and he has to live in Utah now. So,
well, there's also that. So it's interesting because you see players do this, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Like sometimes they go to a different team and have the exact same issue, and it's a matter of. This is where the business side of things comes into play if you're a general manager. Like, obviously, you want to see all these players that you draft land on your roster and be part of the core going forward. But the reality of the situation is that it doesn't work that way. Some guys don't even make it. Some guys that you have high hopes for are like, I don't really want to be here. So it's just...
I will say
the way of life.
From the Winnipeg side of it, I think getting Brayden Yager is a really solid return. Yager, who was picked a year later at the exact same spot with the 14th overall pick. I think Yager has a tiny bit more kind of upside if he hits that ceiling with him. Dynamic scorer. But I think McGroarty is a more NHL ready prospect, which he should be, right? He's a year older. He's been playing in college. I think kind of gets you geared up for playing that kind of more physical game in the NCAA. There's always the NCAA versus CHL, the CHL where you're going to be playing, you just get more reps, right? Because you're playing 72 games a year compared to the 36 to 40 games you're playing in the NCAA. But I think for Winnipeg, kind of like Nashville, you made the best of this situation and you got a player. It's not like you kind of got dumped with some garbage here that you're trying to piece together. Like Yager's a really exciting prospect, and the Jets do have some fun, exciting prospect forwards, like Yager and Brad Lambert. So, walking away it's like, yeah, you'd like to have Rutger McGroarty, but walking away with Yager out of this isn't the worst. And I think this could be one of those like rare win-win situations for both teams where maybe McGroarty is going to help the Penguins this year. I've already seen just put him with Sidney Crosby. We've seen Sidney Crosby turn a bunch of jabronis into, excellent wingers. So I could see Rutger McGroarty kind of playing that role. Not that he's at some random jabroni, but I could see him, if you're playing with Sidney Crosby, I think it'll help you transition a little bit. And if Brayden Yager kind of hits his ceiling, the Jets could have the better player in the end. So we'll see. We'll see what happens here.
Time will tell. We will finish because one of the teams in the Western Conference that is hoping to make a deep run this year is facing a little bit of a conundrum between the pipes, and it's a big deal for them. We'll talk about the latest with Thatcher Demco and what it means for Vancouver as we finish today's episode of Lockdown NHL. Coming up after this.
You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial on an NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So if you're like me, I live in California, but my beloved Miami Dolphins, I don't get to watch all their games. But with YouTube TV and NFL Sunday ticket, I can watch Tua to Tyreek every Sunday, and it's a glorious thing. So with a YouTube fan base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to download America's #1 sportsbook.
Final segment of today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Finishing up today discussing Thatcher Demco because, JD, get a load of this. Got a couple of tweets here. Rick Dallowall of The Athletic for Vancouver. Multiple sources say Thatcher Demco won't be ready for training camp and preseason games. The club is hopeful he is ready for the regular season opener, but even that seems to be in question at this late stage of the summer. For a team like Vancouver, who has massive playoff aspirations this year, this is concerning because we remember going back to the postseason last year when Demko got hurt, and there just continued to be kind of these whispers that maybe he'd be able to come back and help. And now all of a sudden you're getting through most of the off season, and we just have no idea kind of where he's at in his process. Another comment here from Harman Dial of The Athletic as well. If we do reach October and he's not ready for the start of the season, we know the Canucks are good enough defensively that they can win games without Thatcher Demco. More on that in a second, because I've also got some stats for you. The leaders in goals saved above expected for 2023-2024, Thatcher Demco is fourth at 25.83 goals saved above expected. And we know that the name that will be taking the reins, because he's the only other name on the roster, Arturs Silovs. And so I ask you, is it as simple as, well, Vancouver's got a good enough defense to not make this a big deal? Or is this a big deal for Vancouver? What do you think?
I think if you're a team like Vancouver, you're in that kind of like cup or bust type of mode, you can't let an issue like this. It's like going to into a season with your starting quarterback injured. Like you need to have, or if you have an injury prone quarterback, like you need to have some insurance. And I wouldn't be surprised especially if we get too closer to training camp, if Vancouver is aggressive in the trade market, trying to find a team that has multiple goalies. Like they just need a serviceable goalie, a guy who can kind of hang in there. Like, he's not gonna like poop his pants in big situations. You just need a guy who can kind of get you probably till like Christmas time. Because even if Demko is maybe not ready, where you can kind of you kind of take your time with Demko and kind of ease back into it. That way, when the new year starts, you can ramp him up and have him kind of ready to go before the playoffs. Because I think if Demko was healthy last year, we could have been talking about Vancouver in the Stanley Cup final, because that team is really, really good. And you don't want to try to be the Oilers, right, where you were one of the worst teams in the league going into Thanksgiving, and then all of a sudden you got to win like 1,000 games in a row to try to make the playoffs. Like, it's just, if you're Vancouver, right, that you put a lot of time and kind of working towards this moment, you don't want it to be undone by bad goaltending. So I fully expect them to look for some goaltending insurance, because you just have too much riding on this season for Vancouver, and to go in with shaky goaltending.
Yeah, and the tough part is Vancouver is right up against the salary cap right now.
But if Demko's not ready, you can always just put him on LTIR.
Yeah,
and then you have $5 million of cap space that you could do. Like, that's yes.
And here's the thing with that. So Demko's making 5.
Yep.
One name, and I have kind of held fast to this, although I don't necessarily want him to get traded. In fact, I don't want him to get traded. The Minnesota Wild at this point, if they really, really want to go Jesper Wallstedt and Marc-Andre Fleury for this upcoming season, their best bet to trade Philip Gustafsson is going to be to a team dealing with a goalie injury, which we have right here. And Gustafsson is still, he's still plenty young. He's signed for next season as well. So whatever team gets him, if he's traded, whatever team gets him has him on their roster for the next season as well. So they could go that route, but you're talking about one of the best goalies at, goals saved above expected. It's not as easy as just filling that spot with the body. And yes, Vancouver is very good defensively, but I mean, in this instance, I feel like even with a good defense, if you just throw anybody back there, you're not going to have the same results. And so whether it be Philip Gustafsson, whether it be one of the San Jose goalies, I agree with you that I think Vancouver is going to get to the start of the season or even into training camp and get a little better ideas to the timetable.
Yep.
If you're talking about missing maybe the first week or so of the season, week or two, I think you can manage that.
Yeah.
But if this is going to be 2-3 months to where you're like, we're hoping to get him back in February, you got to make a move.
Yeah. And, there's like Shark kind of the same situation where they kind of have 3 goalies, but 2 of them are on the last year of your deal. So if you're a team that is like Vancouver, very close to the cap, and you have to manage every penny, a guy like Mackenzie Blackwood, who, again, like the save percentage and all that is not going to be pretty, but he had a positive goal saved above expected last season, which is a small miracle despite the team in front of him. I think a guy like Mackenzie Blackwood, who would play really well, and especially with a much better defense, or Vitek Vanacek, who has shown to be the guy at time when 2 years ago when New Jersey kind of went on their run, like, I wouldn't be surprised getting one of these like short-term rentals. And then if you need to flip him once Demko comes back or whatever you want to do, you have some flexibility there. And there's always teams that need goaltending, right? That's always the biggest question. There's always a team that needs a goalie at some point. So, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Vancouver makes a trade, or maybe they sign, even if it's a PTO type of guy like that, like Kevin Lankinen, who has played for the Preds last year, had some really solid numbers, that's still out there. Maybe you just PTO him right now and see how it goes into the season. And if you need to sign him to a deal, you can sign him to a deal. But yeah, I would be shocked if Vancouver doesn't add another goalie at some point between now and the start of the season.
Martin Jones, get him back.
Never tardy for the party, Marty Jones. So
get him back in the league.
He's like 37, dude. That's
34.
Yeah, but
37 is
that
37's not that old. I'm not that far away.
that game
from that
one
number.
versus Vegas aged him like 3 years, where he get let up 7 goals. Like there's a really interesting like graph. Like you see his expected goals like saved about that game is like the pinnacle, and from that game it just all crap. That game broke him, like literally
Free
broke
fall.
him. So,
but beyond that, like you've got Pavel Francouz is still on the market. Alex Stalock. There just aren't a ton of appealing names out there at this point, which is why I think trade is probably the better route for Vancouver to go to make this happen. But time will tell. Maybe we get to training camp and they say, "Oh no, he'll be fine." We just haven't heard from him all off season. You never know. But
he turned his phone off as soon as the season was over.
Turned off notifications. Do not disturb.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens, but that'll do it for today's episode. Appreciate everybody tuning in every single day of the week here to Lockdown NHL. We appreciate you making us part of your listening plans throughout the week. And make sure to check out Lockdown NHL coming up tomorrow, Eastern Conference Wednesday, which we'll take a look. I'm sure there will be some Rutger McGroarty discussion, but plenty of Eastern Conference talkers for you coming up tomorrow. Lockdown NHL has you covered all week with great NHL discussion, whether it be conference-specific or power rankings or just at-large NHL discussion. You can get it all here at Lockdown NHL. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube and make sure to subscribe on your favorite audio platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.